Dear Delfi audience, this again is your publisher Hans, and I'm more than happy to be able to present to you Mr. Dmytro Kuleba, the second most popular Ukrainian member of administration in the world, next only to President Zelensky. Вітаю, пан Kuleba.
Доброго дня.
Okay. And I don't think there is anything too good about you you having to step down from your foreign minister position, but there's a bright side to it. You are not tied to any diplomatic protocol right now. So as I observe from your latest interviews, you allow yourself to be pretty sincere, which I'm thankful in advance. My first question would, yes, let's talk about however far you can about the diplomatic kitchen on the upper floor of world politics. I observed, we all did, the strange statement of Joe Biden just before the war that if Putin is going to just make a small nasty incursion into some eastern Ukraine territory, that the US would not be paying attention. Then, just after the war broke out, Jens Stoltenberg, General Secretary of NATO, told that for sure NATO will not interfere. He was being echoed by several Western leaders. And then after a month or so, the foreign policy high representative Joseph Borrell said that there's an agreement that your neighbor, Poland, will give you a bunch of MiG jets. And Borrell later just excused in a very marasmatic way, I would say, telling that he was mixing something up. So what is happening during those days? Why would somebody reveal such a position that it's sure that I'm not going to interfere, I'm not going to put my boots on the ground, as some people told Macron lately? What's happening there? And who's correcting those mistakes after those statements have been made? Please.
It was a lack of strategy. The West never had a strategy, and Russia always had one. Russia's strategy was always to re-establish its influence in what they called the post-Soviet area. When Putin came to power, he took it one level up and demonstrated that he's ready to re-establish this influence by coercion and then force. And so the goal for Putin and Russia as a country, even before Putin, was always clear. But the West was torn between respecting independence and keeping of former Soviet republics, while always looking at them through the prism of Russia. This does not apply to Baltic countries because of the past of what happened in between in the beginning of the Second World War. So Baltic republics were integrated into the West and accepted as part of the West, but with regard to the rest of former post-Soviet Union, the West was always looking at them, including us in Ukraine, through Russian eyeglasses. And this was the issue that trapped. This was the approach that trapped everyone. And this is why Crimea was annexed. This is why Russia was not forced out of Donbas in 2014. And this is why Putin invaded Ukraine in 2022, because he felt this weakness, indecisiveness. He made his mistake in his assessment. But if it wasn't the heroic resistance of the people of Ukraine and the unimaginable level of resilience demonstrated by the state of Ukraine, the West would have accepted the death of my country. They would come to the funeral, deliver solemn speeches, pledge to never allow anything like this to happen again, support any official who would claim he was representing the Ukrainian government in exile, and for decades it would continue like this. But unfortunately, they were ready to accept the disappearance of Ukraine as a state from the map of the world. This is where we were in the beginning, and again, only the people of Ukraine turned them all wrong and forced them to adopt different strategies, which were to support Ukraine in its fight, to grant Ukraine candidacy status in the European Union, and many other decisions that followed, putting us on the same trajectory as Baltic states decades ago, through the recognition of us being part of the West. But we had to pay with enormous volumes of blood, pain, and territorial losses for that recognition.
Very true. A most sad truth. But let's be okay. One detail. Dmytro, were you also being offered a lift while President Zelensky had to say that I don't need a lift, I need weapons to fight? Were you also part of the airplane evacuation plan you were offered?
No, I was offered not to return to Ukraine, because on the 23rd of February, I was boarding a plane in New York after delivering an address to the UN General Assembly. It was the last public address to the world made by a Ukrainian official before the large-scale invasion began. I addressed the entire international community who gathered in the plenary hall of the UN General Assembly. And the day before that, I was in Washington, where I held meetings. I was received by President Biden. So on the 23rd of February, I was boarding a plane to go back to Kiev. But it was the first signals that the war would begin on that night already appeared. And I did receive 2 calls from people who cared, who advised me not to return to Ukraine, because Ukraine was most likely to fall, and they would need a legitimate representative of the Ukrainian government to continue the struggle from abroad.
Let me ask you a more intimate question. Well, I assume, yes, sure, we are passionately with you in your dramatic and tragic situation and in your bravery and whatnot. But you know, those people like Jens Stoltenberg and several Western leaders who immediately were prepared to say that NATO or Germany or the US are not going to intervene, they must have had it orchestrated, because for an amateur like me, it would seem just foolish. Why would you show your cards if you play poker? You just tell what they usually tell. We're deeply worried about. Why would they have to use this particular phrase? Were they under some threat, probably, from secret channels by Putin?
I think it was even worse than being orchestrated. I believe it was not orchestrated, because it came from the instincts of these people, because they were raised in a political culture that taught them, not to fight against Russia. Which is weird if you recall what was the main purpose of NATO when it was established. But politically, avoid escalation was the main avoid escalation at any cost was the main instinct, the basic instinct of 99% of Western politicians. And they didn't even need to orchestrate it in exactly the same way as 2.5 years after the war, after the invasion began, they all rushed to the mics
The Macron thing, are you
to
saying?
oppose Macron's idea of sending troops to Ukraine. They panicked. They did not orchestrate it. It was their instinctive reaction,
Even
which
Finland,
was,
wasn't it?
in my mind, it was the most shameful moment since the beginning of the invasion. Have no doubts that Putin and his entourage laughed in Kremlin while seeing the news feed coming up with another statement from another European leader saying that he's never going to send troops to Ukraine
Well,
to
but
fight.
don't you go too far in your emotions saying that this is outright cowardly action? I mean, might there be, well, is it typical that people come out with the same phrase, even taking into regard that, well, Mr. Macron, President Macron, with all the respect, he could just show some Gallic bravado. There's no French boots on the ground, so why even comment it? They,
Moreover, he was not talking about combat troops. This detail, which is fundamental, makes the whole situation embarrassing. He was not talking about combat troops, but they all rushed to the media to say that they're not even going to do it. And as you rightly said, they exposed their fear. I do not call them cowards. I just give this as an illustration of situations when politicians are driven by the same instinct, basic instinct, which is do not escalate. And in the course of this war, no concept did more harm to Ukraine than the concept of non-escalation.
well, didn't the US feel free to bomb the Wagner brigade in those Syrian oil fields? They were, yes. What escalation? I mean, okay.
But not in Ukraine. But they
Unfortunately, yes.
Western air defense systems were involved in intercepting missiles fired at Israel. But we hear tons of arguments why they cannot be involved in intercepting Russian missiles fired at Ukraine.
Okay, sir, but strictly in between you and me, have you approached any of those leaders asking about any of those strange statements? Like who forced the High Representative Mr. Borrell to take back his promises about Polish MiG fighters being delivered to you? It was so sad to see that your Ukrainian fine pilots were starting to move towards Poland to collect those airplanes. And then he made a total turn. Or did any of the leaders putting on those cowardly phrases make any comment or apology? I know that you're a diplomat, but among the diplomats you have pretty sharp teeth. So certainly you ask them. Don't tell me you don't ask them.
Well, of course, we had some very open and sometimes blunt conversations with foreign ministers and with secretary generals of organizations, with Josep. And by the way, I want to defend Josep and Jens here because they were constrained by the position of member states. Personally, they were willing to do more. I have no doubts in that, and I have evidence of that. But and they were trying to push things forward, but unanimity of member states is the rule, and this was one of the reasons that either constrained them in speaking out loud or forced them to deviate from what they had said before. So we had some very blunt conversations with national governments on that, on those in such cases, and those conversations took place at various levels. And like it happens in diplomacy, it was all, in most of the cases, it was about fingerprinting, finger pointing. It was like foreign ministry is in favor, but Ministry of Defense is against.
Yeah.
Both ministries are in favor, but the chancellery, the office of the prime minister is against. Prime minister is in favor, but Ministry of Defense is against. So you had to do this. This is the most difficult part of diplomacy, is to wrestle through these bushes of internal politics in every country.
And I would now like to propose a slice of our philosophy here, as we see it with my Estonian friends from city of Tallinn, quite far from your front line, actually. We see that there were two major occasions when the West was ready and declared to be ready for a big decision which would have helped you out under the dire situation you have on the fronts and behind your front line right now. The first was, of course, the Lend-Lease Act, decided by U.S. Congress with 417 against 10 votes. This never happened in my lifetime. I have not seen such anonymity, and it never happened with any decision concerning Ukraine furthermore. And so Joe Biden signed it 5th of May 22, right in the beginning of the first phase of the war. Your president, Mr. Zelensky, twice publicly expressed his gratitude. So did a political observer whom I respect, Anders Aslund. You might or might not know him. And then something happened. I know that in Kiev, the wind changed and some prominent members of the establishment expressed an opinion that Lend-Lease, U.S. Lend-Lease will cost money, and you would rather take weapons as a free help. But then it appeared that Joe Biden did not fulfill the instruction of the U.S. Congress. That was a fine print under the Lend-Lease Act saying that the procedures for delivery of defense articles to Ukraine in not later than 60 days after the date of this enactment, the president shall establish expeditive procedures of the amount and the nomenclatura, what they call it, and the financial cost, which Joe Biden didn't. What happened? I mean, you would have all the weapons to defend yourself after the failed counterattack last year, up to now. You would have all of it. Instead, 1 year ago, there was a terrible dogfight, 3 months, you remember, in U.S. Congress, which never received this unanimous solidarity with Ukraine, which is written here. Would you like to comment?
Well, the position of the Biden administration on this matter was always that current existing programs of assisting Ukraine are sufficient to cover its needs, and the Lend-Lease should be kept in store for future days, for whatever future brings. So, and as long as they were delivering, I mean, it worked. Then we stumbled over the adoption of the supplemental, but then in the end, supplemental was passed. So we're pretty much in the same situation where we were. Everything that is being delivered now is happening in accordance with existing programs, and Lend-Lease is let's use military.
Expired.
Let's use in reserve.
No, it's enacted. It's expired. And then
That
you know well,
that's
you well. Yeah.
that was the explanation.
Was this a good thing, even not to appeal? As your ambassador in Washington, Oksana Markarova, told that we don't need it, we don't need it. There was even a demonstration of your Ukraine diaspora in Washington, do you remember? Why didn't you appeal?
Well, this is where we step into the world of real politics,
Do
because
please, yes.
when you have your major partner sending you weapons and insisting that the way they're being sent now works, and all we need is just additional financing. When you do politics, you have to respect the internal considerations of every country. You can work with them, you can push against, so you can try to change them.
Were you pressured not to appeal for the Lend-Lease in May 22?
No, they were just
You
saying,
went,
listen, we are doing it. We are sending you weapons according to these programs. It's happening. You're receiving it. Everything else can wait. This was the position, and it was difficult to oppose it politically because those programs worked and deliveries were taking place.
till they didn't.
Until they didn't. Yes, it was.
Yes.
It's everything has the beginning and the end. But as I told you, this was the moment when you have to choose whether you will be smashing your partner,
Yes.
who, as you can see, is doing important things for you, or you will not be smashing him and continue constructively engaging with him. And second, in politics, you have to be very deliberate and in the issues you pick to fight with your friends on. So, you cannot fight. We were fighting for NATO membership. That was the issue of huge irritation for in our bilateral relations. So you cannot fight with It's okay. Let me formulate it this way. It's okay to fight with friends when you're fighting a war with a ruthless enemy. You fight with friends for the decisions you need to defeat the enemy. That's okay. But you have to be very, very picky in the issues you are going to fight with your friends about. You cannot fight about everything else simultaneously. This is not how friendship works.
What I heard, to my great surprise, because we followed the Lend-Lease case closely, we have been thinking about applying for Lend-Lease timely, because we don't have, as you mentioned also in your perfect interview in Financial Times, we have not too big supply of weapons, to say the least here, the Patriots and whatnot. So I heard with utmost surprise Andriy Yermak, the head of the presidential administration in Kiev, telling that Lend-Lease would be costly, would cost money. And then I turned to my friends in a Washington think tank to contact what they call the Congressional Budget Office of the United States. And here's what they and those guys contacted somebody to get an answer when and how much would Ukraine have been paying. Well, the amount, as there never was any even draft agreement or Lend-Lease signed, the amount we don't know. Some are, well, hundreds of billions, let's say. But the year you would have to start paying is written here. Beginning from 2071, it says.
Yes.
Is this a news? Did you know when the payment is being demanded? Of course, you know that the Second World War Lend-Lease was repaid some 10 years ago by the Brits, right?
Yes. No, I was not aware of this specific date.
Really? The foreign minister of Ukraine, formerly, you were not aware?
I was aware that the payments would be due at a later stage.
Yes.
But I don't remember exactly 2032. But I was aware that it would not be an immediate payback. Moreover, I think I believe we had very good chances to restructure this debt to the United States over years.
As a member of European Union, of course.
Politically, I always believed that shall Lend-Lease be enacted. In the end, like years after, our debt will be restructured and we would not pay back the whole sum. That was my political forecast. But I see your point, and I feel how emotional you are about this issue. It really, but yeah, Lend-Lease should have been enacted. It's a different story of how much we would use out of it. Meaning that, you know, if other programs work, then we could have prioritized them. But I think it was important to put Lend-Lease properly in place and have it as a working option, not as a paper option, but as a working option, just in case we would need it. But for the reasons that I described above, this was not done, and Lend-Lease remained a paper option.
Even before the full aggression started, lots of Western countries, not only European, not only NATO countries, but Norway, Switzerland, Japan, and the EU, and the United States, and Canada, and the UK agreed to block Russian foreign reserves. This was being agreed beforehand, and they did block it days after the 24th of February 22. And there were promises by Ursula von der Leyen in the name of Euro Commission. Also, our Prime Minister mentioned that this money should be turned over to Ukraine, because not everybody is believing that anybody could gain a penny of retribution for destroyed Ukrainian lives and infrastructure from a nuclear state under Putin. So this money is still standing there. You get some interest payments from there, but not the money. So Ursula von der Leyen promised to work and openly declared it very logical to direct this money to Ukraine, but it never happened. So do I have a comment, a sophisticated comment, sir?
I have a very simple comment. It's all about the money, as the song had. The countries, the Western countries, are concerned that if they take Russian frozen assets and give them to Ukraine, they will set up a precedent that will first allow Russia to seize their sovereign assets, which are uncomparable in size to the Russian ones, but still. And second, that they would discredit their own financial system in the eyes of other regimes across the world. And my counterpoint, my counter-argument was always that, no, you will not discredit your system. You will not undermine euro and dollar by doing so, mainly euro, because the vast amount of this money are in Europe. You will not scare away other regimes from keeping their money in euro and transacting with Europe for a very simple reason, because they, according to the best of my knowledge, they're not planning crimes of aggression against other countries. And you can make a very clear point. It happened to Russia because Russia committed a crime of aggression. And you would actually benefit by making a point to other regimes across the world that you use this precedent with seizing Russian assets as a deterrence measure to demotivate other countries from any wrongdoings on international arena. But the West, the Europeans and others were US and Canada, they actually had more kind of relaxed position on this. The opposition on regarding assets mostly comes from Europe. And I just shared with you the reasons why it was the way it was. But
I'm sorry to interrupt, sir. Which part of Europe does it come from? Who is afraid of not confiscating the assets, but retaining the assets and Russian Federation's claim until they pay their retribution for their war damages to Ukraine, just until this moment, which might take long, but...
No, the initial idea was that to actually transfer these assets to Ukraine as a compensation. The assumption was that Russia will not be paying any reparations for the damage inflicted on Ukraine. But listen, this is all theorizing, because I was always of the opinion, and I said it to even publicly, that when bankers and lawyers are always against any interference in government interference and political interference in their work. But when politicians tell them to find a solution, bankers and lawyers will come up with a solution. So it doesn't make sense to discuss the specific scheme of how Russian money could be used. The problem was that there was no political will to use this money whatsoever. The maximum we got was where we currently are, a loan issued to Ukraine at the cost of the interest earned on Russian frozen money. This is the not on the body of money.
Those things, the Lend-Lease and blocking Russian foreign reserves, are where the West was close. Even very clear promises that needs to be done, all the Congress voting, absolute majority for Lend-Lease and so forth. But this is a lesson for you and the ones who have been not yet attacked by their fierce neighbor. Let's talk. Okay.
No,
okay.
let me clarify one thing here. When we speak about Lend-Lease, I explained to you why we were not pushing too hard on that. But the issue of frozen assets and very similar issue, special tribunal for the crime of aggression, we were pushing relentlessly and adamantly. But it never worked because, as I said, it's all about the money, and our partners not only calculated the Russian money, they also calculated potential money that they will lose if they touch the Russian money. This was the problem. But we were, I remember those fights, and they were absolutely fierce fighting with friends for assets, for Russian assets.
А я сейчас вам покажу, откуда на Беларусь готовилось нападение. И если бы за 6 часов до операции не был нанесен превентивный удар по позициям, 4 позиции, я сейчас покажу, карту привез, они бы атаковали наши войска Беларуси и России, которые были на учениях. Поэтому не мы развязали эту войну, у нас совесть чиста. Хорошо, что начали. Биологическое оружие, самые большие электростанции атомные.
Now let's go to some more items which I have no idea about, but you have, sir. What about Belarus? Why did Putin not force Lukashenko, or couldn't force Lukashenko to act your country from the north? You still keep some military on your northern border, but Lukashenko never crossed the border with his tanks, or what? Did you know it's going to happen this way, or you were anticipating that he's also joining Putin?
Well, first, the initial invasion came through Belarus in particular.
Yes. But not Belarus forces, but the Russians.
But not Belarusian forces. Lukashenko, as an old fox, played the game that it wasn't me. I did not attack anyone. It's so it's like a half game always for him. And then he did not lean under in my view, this is my speculation. But in my view, he did not lean under Putin's pressure to send his own troops in the battle, because he clearly realized that the war would end up in his own territory very quickly. He, whatever he says, praising his own army, he realized that we would quickly turn the turntable, and there would be war in the territory of Belarus.
So Putin can squeeze him and put his alleged nuclear arms on Lukashenko's Belarus territory, but not force him to drive his tanks across your border. Is this right?
No, he was. This is very Lukashenko style. Do one half in order not to do the second half. And we also have to admit that since the beginning of the invasion, Russia did not undertake any major military operation from the territory of Belarus, except missiles and drones flying over and striking out targets in Ukraine. But the relationship between Putin and Lukashenko is more complicated than people may think. So I'm not sure that Putin is entirely happy with his friend.
Remember when the Wagner events happened, he was the one to cross it. I mean, find some solution and so forth, wasn't he? Or was this a mimicry, just a part of theater?
Putin, no. Actually, I think that Putin has very few allies. I believe he only has two, which is Lukashenko and Kim.
Melishuk.
He can, yeah, because Xi Jinping is not an ally, because he's a senior partner. And Putin is a minor partner, an important but minor partner in this relationship. The only two people with whom he feels strong and on whose help he can rely are Lukashenko and Kim.
So Comrade Kim is a still bigger and wholehearted friend because he's sending his troops to fight you on Russian territory. But
I was just going to say exactly the same thing. And ironically, it turned out that Kim is more relaxed when it comes to sending troops than Lukashenko. Who would imagine that?
Well, Kim is a nuclear guy.
Yeah. No, but seriously, Putin needs them. Putin does not crush Lukashenko because he needs him. He needs to have someone who can look like a friend, behave like a friend, and with whom Putin can feel himself a big man.
Oh, yes. Tell me about Xi. You have been meeting the General Secretary of Chinese Communist Party, President Xi.
No, there was not a single meeting between Presidents Zelensky and Xi since the beginning of the invasion. They only spoke on the phone. And I held numerous meetings with his foreign minister, Wang Yi.
how is their diplomatic protocol and the level of sincerity? Do they push you, or they have special Eastern signs to pass their assessment of the situation and what needs to be done?
No, it's a completely different diplomatic tradition, and one has to familiarize himself or herself with that tradition before engaging with China. They're not in the pushing mood. They're sitting and waiting. They are waiting for the opportunity to play a decisive role in ending the war and to strengthen their renomme as peacemaker. So they didn't have to push neither on us nor on Russia. They were just talking. And this is diplomacy, Chinese diplomacy. You're just talking to them. You keep talking and talking for hours, and it seems that nothing happens. But then their system digests the conversation, and when you already leave, you either begin to see changes or not see them. But the conversation itself is never like, okay, we make a deal here, we have a discussion, and then we say we agreed to do on this and that, and we leave. Conversation with the Chinese is always a flow of conversation. And it was a very rewarding experience for me professionally. I appreciate that Wang Yi was always open to talk, so I learned him well, and I familiarized myself with the Chinese tradition well enough for the moment when I was invited to China and we had the real conversation there.
Everybody was observing Putin quite lately say that we need to force a peace deal on Zelensky, and China has to help us. So how do you understand this phrase? Why would he need China to be the third part in the group, let's say?
My understanding of China is that they are interested in maintaining specifically Putin's regime in Russia, because they have learned how to work with him. It's predictable for them, and the worst nightmare for China is unpredictability. So unless something happens in Russia to the extent where China will come to the conclusion that the survival of Putin's regime is impossible, they will continue supporting him, because they cannot calculate what will come after him and how the risks can be managed. And the second, which of course puts us in a tricky situation, because if China's goal is, if we imagine that China wants to end the war, but without serious damage to President Putin, these two approaches are difficult to reconcile.
Well, it's not very encouraging if China is standing behind Putin in those not very happy peace talks.
They need someone whom they know how to work with. This is fundamental for them. They benefit enormously from the weaknesses of Putin. They need Russia as a country, as a partner in their global game and struggle. But they are very concerned that the outcome of the war may lead to dismantling Putin's regime, because then the situation will become unpredictable for them. Do they want to be the heroes who fixed the war? Absolutely. And if to achieve this goal, they will have to put pressure on Putin, they will. No, they will put pressure on Putin if, in return, they will be the winners, the ones who will be credited for ending the war.
It just popped to my mind that there was a particular moment when Putin demonstrated himself to Chinese president and communist leader Xi as very unpredictable. As we understand, they talked about Putin's Ukraine aggression during the meeting at the Beijing Winter Olympics. So he was sort of prepared, the Chinese president, but not for all-out aggression and attempt to conquer Kiev. Do you have the same understanding?
We don't know all the details of the interaction between China and Russia ahead of the invasion, but from what we know, and it is based on what you just said, I think Putin actually spoke the truth to Xi. All his calculation envisaged that it would be a blitzkrieg.
Oh, yeah.
Everything would end very quickly, and the world would not even notice it. So, and Putin said something, I guess, vague and very broad, that I will fix Ukraine, it will be quick, you will not even notice it, and everything will be fine. Yeah, and she probably decided not to go into details.
I would ask you now a question. You have naturally being in contact or even having being presenting at some international think tanks like Defense Studies, Atlantic Council, the Royal United Service Institute, the RUSI, well, lots of defense colleges. Well, probably you have, or your ministry has been following even Estonian military intelligence reviews. Does any of this make sense? I mean, which of them, maybe the Polish General Staff's intelligence, have predicted things and analyzed things more or less, I mean, which would make sense? Does any of those works, of those well-paid analysts make sense?
I had a professor in the university, a very, very wise man who taught me a lot. And one of the rules he taught me is the following. Dmytro, he said, to have one good book see the light of the world, 100 average books have to be written. I believe the same rule applies to policy papers and analysis papers produced by various think tanks. All of them have the capacity to produce a meaningful document. But to have it done, they regularly produce documents of lower quality. But the fact that they all took the prospect of Ukraine against the background of Russian invasion wrong, of course, speaks a lot. This was a judgment to the analytical methodology. This was the moment when all think tanks have to ask themselves, what do we get wrong, instead of continuing sticking to old concepts and approaches.
So my last question, as you are limited in time, Dmytro, is about how can you be so relatively calm, I would say. This is the one scarce time I see you even half smiling during our video, but you're not a foreign minister anymore. How does the terrible war, the situation, the killing, the bombing, and the feeling sometimes that you're not being helped according to the promises, how does it enact on the leaders' nerves? Zelensky's nerve, Andrei Yermak's nerves, the generals' nerves in the general staff in Kiev, spending time in the bunkers, as I hear from some of your colleagues been telling secretly to the U.S. press. How does it change you psychologically?
If you break down, you are not worth the fight. Then you are not the one who should be fighting.
You've seen people intimately breaking down and then correcting themselves?
We all have our moments of weakness. But
All
if
right.
you do not pull yourself together immediately, then you have to, then you shouldn't be doing this job. And the more moments of weakness you overcome this way, the more galvanized you become, the stronger you get. And then you, of course, begin filling your life with stimulating exercises. Like I started going to the gym, and it really helped me to set new goals and to work on something different from my daily routine. But we are all human beings, and we live one life. This life can end any day. And this is why you should not be afraid of smiling, of enjoying life, because it can end at any given moment. You may not wake up in the morning because the shahed will fall on your apartment building, or the missile or something like that. You have to fight and live life. This is simultaneously. This is the art of fighting and winning wars.
Well, you're all heroes there in this administration under the terrible pressure. And the best thing we could ask you, Ukraine, to do for our money, of course, is to deliver some of your good infantry brigades into Baltic soil. So this would be something.
I was always a big advocate of this idea. So
yes.
I'm not in the administration anymore, but with all means available to me, I will continue advocating it. But first, we have to win the war with your help.
Oh. Let's praise the heroes. Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава і дякую Естонії, естонському народу і всім балтійським народам, литовцям та латишам. Дякую за те, що ви з нами.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Bye-bye.